It's the Dev Friday Show with Mark and Tim.
So the question is, Mark, what's it like now that you've quit teaching?
Have I quit teaching?
Isn't that? I think
I'm on track to quit.
Listening, did you not tell them yet? Are they going to find out that you've retired through this podcast? Is that what it is?
That could be. It's everything in my life, Tim, is a journey.
And
so you are on this journey with me, and eventually, and hopefully someday, yes, I will transition out of being academic and be a real worker in the system again.
A real worker in the system? Is that what it is?
I don't know.
I think Mark,
we'll see.
Mark, you just discovered the secret of my special little cough button here that I use to toggle my mic on and off. That it doesn't actually toggle it off all the way, does it? At least I thought that's what you were laughing at.
No. What I'm laughing about is the show title, which I just start to. I just read right before the show here. It's no SquareSpace. Mark and Tim talk about some personal projects. All right.
Yeah, I don't know. I had no idea. Like, I looked at your Twitter today just to try to get an idea. Is there anything that we're going to talk about? And to be honest, there wasn't much interesting. You're complaining about this, complaining about that, but nothing too interesting. So I figured. Well, honestly, I was chatting with somebody else, and we were talking about the configuration of our Jenkins build, and I wanted a little button in a place, and the response was, "Well, it's no SquareSpace." So I thought, that's pretty good. That's a good title. It's no SquareSpace, and I figured we'd start this off because now that you've retired from teaching, and your coworkers are finding that out as they listen to this podcast. How did you leave the art department website? Because in our last episode, you were faced with a bunch of decisions, and impending, like, people wanting this site to be up. They're asking you to make updates. You don't want to update it because you're rebuilding it. All this stuff, and I think our listeners were just like, "Well, how did that all work out?"
Well, that's true, and I'm like I said, like everything else in my life, it's a journey, it's a process, it's never ending. And I know we left off where I was kind of debating on should I don't know, do a kind of my own kind of hosted kind of a situation on Firebase. I like to build my websites now with the static, without having to use a back end and just to deploy it on either using React or Gatsby, and that's kind of my preferred workflow. But then I'm thinking, okay, if I'm going to be redoing the
there is a backend. It's not like there is no serverless. There is no, you're just using Firebase.
But I'm not writing it. That's the issue. Yeah.
You're using Firebase does Firebase expose a GraphQL style?
If I do have, it doesn't expose it, but if let's say using a Gatsby website and then I have data in Firebase in its database, I could use a plugin that could access, pull that in and suck it into GraphQL through Gatsby.
Okay, but it is just the Firebase storage, which is traditionally, yes. I mean, their customers are mobile apps. People that are saying, I don't want to have to worry about where I deploy the shared and distributed like data storage for my app. I want people to be able to log in, just use a Firebase login, and then they can play with their data. And then there's some rules, and Firebase has some auth where you can see other people's data, maybe if the rules are right. And you're just applying that to the website and saying, I'm going to treat it as if it's a mobile site, and it's just going to consume Firebase kind of from the browser.
True. And that's kind of, I don't know, that's where I've been leaning towards, because as I kind of go back and forth, should I write a back end, with an API? I still kind of, I love the front end workflow of the the asynchronous kind of static JavaScript type sites. But do I write like a backend or API that I would access, or do I just use a hosted platform that is designed for hosting data and gives me an API that I could access and then be able to work with that?
And that's what we were talking about last week was contentful, prismatic.
Which I do, yes.
Concepts.
And I did take a closer look at Contentful, because they do have a free kind of starter plan, for kind of small projects and also for nonprofits. I guess they keep it free, so that's a nice thing. I did look at the interface. The interface is very, very similar to Prismatic, because I've used Prismatic before for another client project, and then the client likes it, and it works out well for them, for them managing, the minimum content that they need to update on their website, which is basically maybe I don't know, once a month or something like that. It's not that heavily of an updated site, but it gives them the ability to make the update themselves. So they don't have to bug me or send me or, have or charge me for, or having for me to charge them for actually making an update. So I do like to offload that.
And in that workflow,
yeah,
they're making the change on the Contentful site. It's not like it's built into whatever their site is. They're going to Contentful, making changes, and then they are displayed in whatever the public-facing site is that pulls content from Contentful.
So the website's a small website, and it's a mix of static and content, and also content that they want to maintain themselves. So the way I built it out was just using Gatsby and having it generate the pages that need to be static. They're not going to worry about updating, but there's a few pages that, let's say they're project pages where they're updating the projects that they're working on or they're trying to get attention on. Those are the pages that aren't static and then are dynamic. And every time a website gets rendered in the browser, it's pulling the data from Prismatic.
Oh, sorry, from Prismatic, not Contentful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which I was thinking about taking this to the next step. And this is where the route that I'm thinking about going with the art department website, because I do like to, just like we did with the devfridayshow.com, it's basically a
what was that URL again? I mean, just people wanted to listen.
devfridayshow.com.
devfridayshow.com, huh?
If you want to listen to this show and it's all its beautiful audio glory, I would go there.
That's definitely the place to go. Or your favorite podcast app, because we should be in pretty much any of your favorite podcasts.
We're everywhere.
Spotify?
Yeah, right. We're everywhere.
Okay.
Yeah. So where I'm going with thinking about I like the blend of a static website, so a statically built website, but then having also a dynamic component into it. Because the way I want to have the art department website built, or I want to just like when somebody wants to change the art department website, they come to me. They say like, okay, put up this page, but you need these images updated. And as a web developer, that's the last thing I want to think about, right? I hate maintaining websites, right? Especially for websites that other people that they're maintaining the content for, they're coming up with the content. They should have tools to allow them to actually manage the website. That's why WordPress is kind of, still so popular, because, marketing managers and people within companies, it is a good experience for them.
Isn't that what Squarespace is providing? Isn't that what those platforms are providing too? Is an easy way to say, oh, here's a template. You have a couple images because you're a store that's making, handmade gifts or something like that. You want a website component to something that maybe is your Etsy store or something like that. Oh yeah, you can just grab pictures and just plop them right here, some content, some description, and boom, it's easy. You don't have to worry about it.
So the way that I want to redesign the art department website, I'm working on it, and then I'm kind of starting to build it out, is I wanted to make it more of a profile portfolio style site where every student can have their own account. They can log in, basically, have their own, sort of like their own kind of Instagram that's connected to their site. So they'd be able to upload their portfolio, their images, have their own kind of, image or design timeline in a sense, or gallery. And then have that feed into a main kind of gallery for, the different types of, if it's going to be photography, it's going to be fine art, if it's going to be digital work, it'll then kind of filter into those galleries that we have within the site. But then it'll be all automated. So if somebody wants to update content on it, or even if they're doing something they want to announce, like they're doing like an art show or a presentation around campus, and they want to have that profiled, well, they could just put that information themselves, and then we'd have a section of the website that would automatically pull that. So I like the idea of, like I talked about with the devfridayshow.com, it's a static site, but it's built with Markdown. So the way that we update the shows or the episodes each week is that we'll create like a Markdown file, and then just push that, commit that, and then it takes that data from the Markdown file, and then it sucks it into GraphQL, and then kind of builds out the pages from there. So I really like that model, especially for prototyping, quickly getting something up, because there's no back end. I don't have to design anything. It's just Markdown files.
But is that too manual for the art department concept?
So
because then you're expecting people to learn Markdown. No. So I'm not going to ask them to do any Markdown at all, but kind of thinking about this blend of static and dynamic, where start with a Markdown site, just again, and get it working and get like this website built, to design the layouts and just get it functional, and then start to offload some of that data to, let's say if I would use Firebase, to start building it out with their system, but then kind of also blending to where it's real time. Let's say if somebody would upload an image or make a data change, they would see that immediately. So it'd be a live change within the site, but then also have a component where when the site gets built, so when we push an update to it, or it generates the build process to update the static site, would also pull down the data that they update in Firebase. So then it kind of builds it statically at the same time. You know what I mean? So the data's in Firebase, but you have a static version of it, so you don't have to be pulling it from Firebase all the time. Is that
correct?
Am I understanding that
So
correctly?
that's would be kind of the trying to find the best of both worlds. We're still trying to give the user the ability to change the data whenever they want to do it and see that change live in real time. But then to bring in the benefits of having a statically built site for like the speed and everything like that.
And simplicity, the hosting simplicity.
When you make a build of the site, it'll pull that data back down and then build it statically. So then the website needs to check to see, okay, is this content in the database? Oh, I'm sorry, is it already built statically? If it is, then don't worry about it. If it's not, then you need to go get it. So,
but the issue you run into there is, I mean, cache invalidations. Like it may be built statically, but did they update it? How do you know
correct.
that your build is out of date? But that may actually work to your benefit in that if the users are seeing, okay, I've added this picture, I've done all that, but then they have to have like a publish button that basically says collect it and rebuild it from the data that's in the database. That's not necessarily bad, because then you have like this idea of a preview and then a publish.
Yeah, so I was thinking about maybe just doing a build like once a day, just setting a schedule and just have like build like maybe at like, at night or something like that, and just kind of rebuild and push a new update to the site. So if any changes were made during the day, then it could be statically built into the site. But then still give the ability to see the changes in real time. Because the one thing that's what the route that was going with the clients I was talking about using Prismatic. I would say, okay, if you update the data on Prismatic, I'll just pull the data back in Prismatic when the site gets built. And I had it automated where, let's say, every time they make a change in Prismatic using a hook, it would automatically generate a build process.
And do the build right there.
But the build would still take, let's say, 3 to 5 minutes to actually see live on the website. Because that's not really a good user experience for a user. Because when they make a change, they want to test it, see it on the website, and actually see that change in real time.
Right.
So I pulled away from that. I still had that process working with. So every time they make a change, it is still making you update the site, but it's still, it's kind of separated off to where there's dynamic content that's being pulled from Prismatic all the time when the site's being rendered, and then there's static content too. So that's the route that I'm going with. Like I said, I'm still leaning towards building on Firebase, but like we talked about before, if I build on Firebase, I'm going to have to basically, you're still kind of, and even though you're not writing the back end, you're writing the interfaces.
You're writing the middle layer to it, right?
Yeah. So that takes work. So,
and you may not have to like host the database, but essentially you're just deferring, like from an API standpoint, we would maybe create a very specific API for content, art related content, right? And then your backend code would be to do the generalization of say, oh, you've uploaded this type of image. Well, this is where we store it in the database. Mm-hmm. When you bring in Firebase as your dependency instead, you just take that backend code that says, oh, I understand what you uploaded, and I know where to store it. You just move it to the front end. That's all you've done.
Yeah.
You've just said now the front end has to understand how to store things in a generic database versus has to understand how to communicate with a specific API. And that's kind of like, that's where, from my perspective, the Contentful and the Prismatic seem like a really good fit. I've played with them years ago now for some other things, because they'll let you go in and define your content types. Mm-hmm. And then you get that really specific API. Yeah. Then your front end is like, oh, you've said that these are the fields. Well, I know how to save those now because I'm using this very specific API, and it's not like I have to know that a user post looks like this shape and is stored in this place in Firebase. Mm-hmm. So, but what I love about the whole plan that you have is, and this is something that I think as you progress and you do development, either it's not, that's the other thing, and we're just this is how this show is. We don't even know what we're talking about. It's like the idea of when you're labeled, or you label yourself, or however you slap the label of like a senior developer. Senior developer does, or Ninja Rockstar, right? Senior Ninja Rockstar developer.
Which I am getting up there in age, Tim. So I think if I'm going to be putting the Ninja label back in my resume, I might need to add the senior on top of that, because
Senior
I'm so
Ninja.
old now, so
well, but that's my point. Senior developer, to me, like we throw that label around, and sometimes we kind of self-apply it because I've been doing it for X amount of years. Now, someone once told me I don't have to say that I've been a developer for about 20 years, which is what is the truth now. They said, like, once you go over 15, you just have to say more than 15.
Yeah, I was thinking about this week too. Maybe I was a little quiet on Twitter. I didn't really get depressed this week, but just think about my age because each week we were talking about what I'd like to do in the future and think about the next year or so transitioning. And actually, I feel really good about that. I'm actually getting a better mindset and kind of know the direction I kind of want to go and the type of companies I want to apply for. So I'm actually feeling more better about that.
I love that you really have backed up how much you talk about this on the show to not freak your coworkers out.
I know.
I love how we're really toning down that.
But then what I did was I get a little depressed thinking, I'm making this change in my mid 40s, which is kind of crazy. I'm like, I kind of had a reality like, really? I'm like, this is why people, when they, especially in academia, they stay in academia for their whole lives. Because
they're afraid of the change. They don't want
to move back out of that, to go back in and to, be a professional outside of academia. It's a big challenge. And I think that's what the past couple of years been kind of freaking me out because I kind of feel like, okay, I kind of want to do that partly because of financial reasons, also because of you kind of hit a ceiling when you work in academia, at least at a community college. So feeling like I want to be able to have more options regarding that, and also just the projects I work on, and because I always will teach. I love teaching. I always will be a teacher, and I'll think about being an adjunct, while I'm working full time. But
adjunct is where you just get to come back and then say you don't teach a class instead
exactly
of
one
be
class.
A teacher and not
usually 1 or 2 classes, right?
Okay.
But thinking about it is a big mindset of thinking about how can you make that transition. Usually academics just retire. They work till they're 67 years old and then they'll retire from that. So
is the thing with the transition that is either difficult or concerning, is it like that your career progression outside of academia has stalled and you don't know how to get it started again? It's like,
exactly.
You can't be like, and I just stopped, I just finished, or I've done this here. It's like, well, I stopped doing it. I started teaching for this many years, and that doesn't necessarily translate well.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Since I've been in academia for a while, one thing I've gotten better at is learning faster. So I feel confident about that. So if I feel like I need to, let's say there's a set of whatever, languages or APIs or whatever tool sets that I need to learn, I'm not afraid of learning that. I could learn that within, I think I have a pretty good idea of how long it would take me to get there, to get to that level. But it's just a matter of I haven't really worked with other developers, seriously, on a large project for many, many years. And so that's a little bit getting back into that
tooling drift too. Even though you've been teaching tooling, because you've been teaching, you've been changing the languages and the things and the frameworks that you use as you teach. But when it's talking about collaborative tooling, things like that, there's obviously some drift there that maybe you're not exposed to because you're not doing that type of collaboration. Yeah. But,
so that was freaking me out a little bit about my age. I was like, man, it's like people shouldn't be doing this when they're mid 40s. I'm doing a big transition, but I guess that's what the whole thing of having a midlife crisis. I guess that's what it is, right?
Is that? I don't know. I've not.
Never. Well, you haven't got to the golden age that I am yet.
So we were actually at a funeral 2 days ago, yesterday, for a family friend, who it wasn't a surprise other than it just took for us to find out. We knew that she wasn't answering the phone and trying to contact somebody but her health had deteriorated over the years, so she had someone to live in and just figuring out what had gone on. But at least we were able to know what happened and be there at the funeral. But talking to another friend that had worked with her and been much closer to her than us, he was talking about approaching, I think, his 60th birthday. Mm-hmm. And he's like, at first I thought when he was younger, 40 was the thing. He's like, now I feel the big one, because that's how he referred to it. He said, his birthday is coming up. He's like, and it's the big one. And I'm like, well, what's the big one? And he said 60. And because I've always looked at 40 as the big one, but now that I'm closer to that, I don't feel like it's big at all.
You're right on the edge, though, right?
It's not big at all. And he's saying 60 for him in his mind is the big one. And my mom is there, and she's like, no, it's 70. So you've got some time. Time.
It was interesting. Yeah, 30 was for me. I think 30 was 40 was nothing. Hitting 40, I was kind of like, it's kind of like
I don't even remember 30.
The slow crawl from 30 to 40 in my those years. But it's 50 though. That's kind of freaks me out.
50.
Yeah.
And also too, is it's like the 5 in front of the number? It feels like a halfway point or something like that.
And also I don't want to go down this road and be down on it, but but my father died when he was 59. So that's also kind of sticks with me a little bit. I'm like, so that not saying that wow, I only have 20 years or 15 years left, but I'm like, it's still kind of weighs on me a little bit. Just knowing that.
I will say with my dad passed away about a year ago now, a little bit more than a year ago, and just like doing that math, that's impacted me and how I think about things.
Yeah.
Because his dad, my grandfather, him and my grandmother were lived with us for the last, I want to say 5 years of their lives, something like that, 5, 6 years. My grandfather lived to 92.
Oh, wow.
So, and my grandmother lived to, I think 90, I forget where it is. So my dad died now when he was, I think, 72. And that kind of the calculation in your mind for me, I do that calculation of, well, will I see great grandkid? What's the likelihood of that? Because here's how old my kids are, how old am I going to be when they're my age? And then how's that going to work? And the math used to work out, and I didn't think of 70 necessarily as that number, but now that number's become very real because my dad died. But yeah, for sure, we look at that and figure out, and I think everybody's listening is like, this is a downer. This is.
That's why I didn't want to go there,
show.
But we're talking about how,
But it's the truth, right?
Life transitions later on. This is interesting, which I never thought, because when you're young, I don't know, whatever. You work for a job for a few years, and if you, I never got fired for one, but let's say if you got fired and laid off and you had to make a change, that was whatever. It might be traumatic at the time. At the same time, you could bounce back when you're young, right? But making these changes, though, also too, the house fire too, that kind of also got a reality check too. It was like fact of that almost pretty much pretty much almost lost everything.
Right.
And so that's when you have those big life events happen, it really starts to kind of reframe your mind, and also maybe think about your time, maybe limited here. So, but make use of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. But like what you're saying about as you get older, those things become more, I don't know, job and career things become more significant. Yeah. I remember, the startup game is supposed to be a young man's game, right? I went to work for a startup after working in DevRel, and I had a year there. I actually took a pay cut from what I was making when I was doing DevRel to go to the startup, because it was something that I thought I still believe in the company. In fact, there's other companies that have been kind of successful in that space. It's a hard space to be in. I think the idea was great. But we had about a year's worth of money that we ran out. And I remember just sitting there thinking, there's a lot of people that are dependent on me making money.
Yeah.
This is a significant thing. And that was impactful in my life in many ways, not just from a career way, but even from a faith way, like what that meant. And what how things happened after that, and my perspective on it all. But yeah, because once it's not just the age when you think, oh, I'm so old, how am I going to get a different job now? So you have some of that, like this is what I've always done. How do I learn new skills? That's harder for me because I'm not as young. But there's also the more people depend on us the older we get. Yeah, and at least in this arc of our career, where we have kids and a family,
Yeah, that's the same very similar experience I had when I got out of the restaurant ordering biz back in the day, where I worked for that. Well, it was about 2 years.
Yeah,
it was about almost a year and a half to 2 years. Yeah, and the first year it was interesting, kind of getting into it. I was doing my own contracting, so I had multiple clients. Once then you get in a startup, there's some friction there because of having to put the time into the startup to actually try to build it out, and while also doing client work is tough.
Right.
So I had to pretty much stop my client work and just kind of devote my time. So pretty much for almost a year, just kind of kept my head down for that. But then with the startup, when you start running out, then you have to start, try to get some client work back in again.
Now I got to ramp that back up. Yeah.
And then it gets super stressful. And then what happened to me? I became an academic.
and that's
because I was teaching at the same time as
origin story
as an adjunct, but then it was a position opened up, and they were like, okay, do that. You have to go get your master's degree if you want to do this full time. I was like, all right, I'll do that in my 30s. So it was like, which was interesting. Like doing it in your 30s, I think is actually so much easier than doing it in your early 20s. But also at the same time, you're like, why am I doing this? But anyway, the fact of
that is a great part of academia where it's like, you want to teach here, then you have to give our system more of your time.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's one of the few industries that really shines in that concept of before you can work in this industry, you have to literally pay your dues.
True. Yeah. So life, right?
And all this came from just the idea, and this is where I was going now minutes ago. We'll have a chapter mark here. There'll be a chapter here that'll
We can
bring
talk
us
about build
back,
systems.
right?
Actually, that is one thing I
that-
wanted to talk to you about today. So
Build
and it kind
systems,
of
but this is
well,
but the idea that you're a senior developer just because you've been doing it for a while, that's
okay,
like not true. And I forget what point I was going to make about being a senior developer, because we'll have to rewind the podcast and I will listen to whatever we were talking about back then. But that idea that being a senior developer isn't just because you've put the time in. You know, it's not a label that you just apply to yourself because, well, I've been doing this for 20 years. It should be a label that you apply to yourself because of what you are then able to do, what you're able to understand. Can you teach other people? Can you communicate concepts in a way that is instructive to junior developers? If you can't, then you're not probably a senior developer.
Or can you solve problems faster with less code?
There's that, right? There's that. Do you understand? Are you, what you said, you're now able to learn things faster, right?
Yeah, because when you're young, you're kind of just like you're just kind of throwing things against a wall, right? Both with like if you're trying to work to build out something, solve a problem, a lot of it when you're young, it's a lot of trial and error, because you're kind of like trying to wade through the muck and trying to figure out which direction is the best route to go to try to solve the problem that you're working on. Then once you get to be older, you kind of feel like, okay, I know I went down that path in the past and it wasn't too well. And you start to build up this kind of knowledge base of just kind of knowing how to navigate a little bit easier, both with like learning new skills or new technology, or if you're, let's say, focused on using a technology, then you can, kind of how to use, especially like we talked about how you've been kind of using PHP for a very, very long time. So that means you become an expert in it. And for you to, let's say, if you're faced with a problem and you know,
well, but here's the thing though, that doesn't necessarily mean that, right? Because I've interviewed developers that had the senior title on them, and I wouldn't call them a senior, even though they've been doing it a long time. They've just never, I have to guess this, right? Like I have to, from what I see, I have to fill in the blanks. But they never continued on past I use PHP to solve this set of problems that work very well. Maybe it's a simple form and just real simple CRUD data, in and out of a database. And I just do those projects. Those are the projects I do. And they never got projects that stretch them to be like,
okay, yeah, I
should
gotcha.
There's a reason why people encapsulate code and split it up and have this idea of single responsibility. And because at a large scale project, that's the only way you can actually work with it and understand it and grasp it, because you need these divisions so you can just you can like work on one concept and understand and have confidence that it's not going to impact the rest of the application, because this is a very large and complex application. I can look at my own career progression since I've worked with the code base that I'm working with primarily right now over the past, I think 4 years maybe now, and how that has changed my perspective because of different problems I didn't have to tackle before at a different scale. And it's grown me as a developer, and that's great. That's what you want, right? And I actually wonder sometimes, like, I have no problem with contracting. I've been a contractor for most of my professional career, but sometimes as contractors, I think it's easy to get into, this is the type of job I do.
Because you could turn them over faster, which
Right.
I find, like, if you to beat the really successful contractors, are either ones who could be those ninjas who could or those commanders who could go into a company or project and be able to kind of figure the stuff out that on the fly, or somebody who's really specializes in their stack. Right. So they have, like you talked about, like they either, if it's a LAMP stack or whatever, static sites or whatever they do, they
It's the thing
specialize
that
in
they
that.
do, and they just know how to churn it out.
So they're very good at estimating time, knowing how long it'll take them to build this type of application or this website out. And then they're able to turn those projects over faster, which keeps the clients happy, and they're able to get more work and more word of mouth. And so it is successful. But that's one thing I always kind of struggle with too, of like kind of, because I get, me, I get bored with stuff. That's, want to make a change every now and then. So, when I would go look for different client projects, I would actually, maybe to my detriment, I would like want to look something that would challenge me.
I would do that all the time.
But then at the same time, though, it kind of puts you in a weird place where, like, I kind of have an idea how long it would take me, and then it takes 2 or 3 times longer, and I can't build a client for that because I didn't sell them on that. So you put yourself in a lot more harm than you should.
Yeah, we touched on that a little bit, but I would do that. I would do that when I was working for smaller like clients that I was doing smaller projects for. Is if there was an API that I wanted to learn more about, I would learn a little bit about it. I write some code against it. Okay, so I understand how this API works. I get a feel. I've done some of that kind of hello world examples, right? And then I would bid those jobs. I'd find them and I'd be like, oh, this is a job that either this is a good solution for, so I can say, hey, I would solve it by using this API or this service, and this is how it would look, and I'd explain that in the kind of the job posting, or people that were actually saying, hey, I want to integrate with this, and I'd be like, yeah, I would love to help you integrate with that. And the reason is because I want to learn more about it. So that's a great way, even as a contractor, to grow. And I'm by no way saying that contract developers don't grow. I just think that is because the same thing can happen if you are just a developer on a single project that doesn't have a scope that challenges you, right? And you're just maintaining, say, for one company, you're maintaining their same site that does their same things. You can still get stuck in this. Well, this is the only way that we do it. We don't have exposure to other concepts or ideas, and you can halt your professional growth that way too. But so I have no idea how we got onto the developer concept.
I'm gonna make this. I'm gonna do a beautiful segue here to kind of elevate this to something more practical. Something who, especially for those who are listening and don't want to hear about our life story and for us to moan and complain about it. But thinking about Monorepos.
Wow, this was the segue.
Exactly.
Just thinking about
this
the
was one
Monorepos?
thing. Well, actually, we can go down a little story here of how I did a little spring cleaning with my GitHub repos this week, and it's another one of those things that you feel like, oh, if I clean this up and organize this a little bit better, it'll clear my mind up and make me much more kind of organized up here. And then when I work in my projects, it'll just be a nicer time, right? So, but I think you brought up before about when I talked about using like Git submodules. In a project, you're like, no, you don't want to do that. It's like and then I think you even mentioned like a monorepo that you prefer that workflow. Which, thinking about going back into companies now, that is a thing. And for when I was working, that wasn't really a thing, and so I was like starting to look at that and read that, and then also the reason like when I was going through my GitHub repos, and guess how many GitHub repos I have? Just put a number. Just put a number.
37.
I had 160 GitHub repos.
These are just people. These are things that you forked, or
this is what I was doing.
What you had created
over the past couple of years. What I was doing, I would pretty much every week for every course I taught, when I would work on like a demo or some exercise files or that I wanted to show to the students, I would make a GitHub repo out of it, because I do like the feature where you could download an archive or zip file of your repo. So if I want to give code to students, especially because they're not going to go into GitHub and do that, because they're just design students. So if I end up getting the like HTML, CSS, or JavaScript files, I could just make a GitHub repo, give them that zip link, put it into my Blackboard learning management system, and they could just download it. So the workflow was really, really nice. But then I realized I was like, I have all these GitHub repos, and I'm thinking like, what? This is kind of crazy. So what I was spending my time doing this week was really just downloading all of them. I didn't throw away any of them, but I downloaded them and pretty much just put them all into one big repo. Because I was realizing because I was backing away from giving like zip files or archives of repos, and I was doing a little bit less and less. I was like, okay, I still want to save all of these examples I built out, so I want to reference them later, or just if I teach the course again. But I want to get this into one repo and just to kind of optimize. So I was able to get
still put the downloads there, kind of.
Well, that's one thing I probably want to think about, and maybe we could talk about that. Like, would be the best way if I had this one GitHub repo for all of my courses now, and inside each of my course, I have each week, and then so I have subfolders to organize them. But how can I still do like a zip file of like this specific week within the specific course within a specific GitHub repo? That is something I would still like to do, but I don't know. I haven't done that yet. But I was able to take my 160 GitHub repos and get them down to 30. So that actually is kind of nice.
That seems much better. I know you could use like releases and attach files to releases.
But could you do that sense? I would have to probably set up a build system for this, right? So what if I set up a build system where it did like a GitHub action and then on a specific folder in a sense, and then basically zip up that folder and then put it in some type of release folder.
Yeah, I wonder though, because the same way you can kind of address it as a zip file and get the whole repo as a zip file, right?
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you can give a reference to a fragment of the repository and just get that in a zip format too. I don't know. I just wonder, because like if you You can take a commit, and I think you can do .diff underneath it, and it will show you the diff file for a specific commit hash. So I don't know if you can do that as kind of like a sub part of the repo. That'd be interesting. But yeah, a build system too would.
So then it
would
started
make
me
that
thinking
work for
about
you.
the other
Now,
projects
how did
I
you bring
have.
them in? Just out of curiosity. So you have all these repositories.
Oh,
I
yeah.
believe there are techniques that will let you keep the history and kind of merge the history. Or
I
did
don't
you
care
just
about
say
that.
like you didn't care? You just
No,
like just,
no, but
just
what I
bring
did
them all
with the other thing I discovered, which I think I discovered this last week, and I didn't talk about. I think it was after the show last week. I discovered the GitHub command line tools. And I was like, why haven't I been using these?
They're they have their own little client for GitHub.
With the GH command, and I could pretty much do everything I was doing on the website or the desktop client. I could do that or just on the command line. So once I figured that out, I can just do this all in the command line. Just basically clone all these in the project. Just delete the .git folder to kind of reset it, and then that's I was able to do it. Did take some time, but at the same time, and I could have automated if I probably figured out how to script it. At the same time, though, it was pretty seamless because the one thing I was keeping myself from doing this in the past was managing through the website, which is just laborious, having to go there and be able to kind of do it, a clone, get the URL. But now I can just do it all through the command line. It was super fast.
Nice.
Took me a couple of days, but it was still faster than that I was working on. So thinking about the Monorepos, the other type of GitHub projects I have, where I might, if I'm working on a project, I may have like the website, maybe a Git repo, the API, maybe a Git repo. Maybe if I have a mobile version, like a native, I have a separate Git repo.
No.
I know.
No,
and then I was realizing,
no.
okay, I should put this into one Monorepo for this project. So then I was
and
thinking,
here's for those
how does this
those
work?
that are listening to this and they'll be like, why would you do that? Here's the reason why. It's because I've done this. I've taken a monorepo and then been the everything should be in its own place, organizational, isolate things. Part of my mind was like, no, we should have a repo for the API and a repo for the web client and a repo for, we actually had like webhook processing to handle telephony stuff. That they should each be in their own because they're completely independent, kind of, right? Like in concept, they are different services. So I should split them up so one change to one doesn't mean a change to the other. What a terrible idea. What a terrible idea, because a year later I was undoing all that work to throw them all in one thing and say, how about instead of just looking at this, because this was past me, right? From a very simplistic viewpoint where it's like, okay, I'm basing some of this on a framework and framework skeletal applications take the root of your repository. Just like, don't do it that way, Tim. Just make a directory in your repository and put the framework skeletal thing in there and start looking at them that way. The reason being is like you have, like what you just said, you have the API someplace, right? And you have the mobile client someplace. And if you're going to change the API, well, what are you probably also going to change?
You're going to be changing the other, the front end,
Right. So
the
now you
interfaces
have
for it,
two
yeah.
commits in two places, and you have to make sure they're synced together. And then you're like, let's make sure they're the same version. So however I deploy this, we make sure version 1.1 and 1.1 are deployed at the same time. Because if they're not, the mobile app is going to want an API that doesn't exist. So just put them together and be like, hit a button and deploy it all together. Make it one thing. So there's a state where everything works together. That's the beauty of monorepos.
And that's why, because as I was getting into this, learning about that, because one thing I've actually been sensitive about the past year, I've been trying to, get my mind in a better place, is switching context of like what I'm working. If I'm working on the same project, but then the project has multiple pieces, trying to bring it closer together, so I don't have to kind of do, switch what I'm, switch my workflows or whatever, and trying to make them more aligned. So I totally get this now. I'm like, okay, if I do this now, it gets the build process. So if I have an API, let's say if it's written in Python, that I want to basically do a push to, let's say, the Google App Engine, if I was going to host it there. And if I had a front end where I was going to be hosting that on Firebase, but I had to go through the GitHub hooks to do the build and then do the push there. Let's say then I did have an iOS application that I want, or an Android application that then it has like a separate, build process. So what is the tools? What's the recommended tools to kind of tie this all together?
No idea. I mean, there's tons of them though, right? There's tons of build code. Like Jenkins is the old one that everybody knows about. Hopefully, probably. You could run Jenkins, or there's tons of new services. I've played with BuildKite in the past, Circle CI in the past, Travis CI.
Yeah.
And they're all either continuous integration, whatever you want to call it, but it's a pipeline where it's like we're going to do stuff, maybe we're going to run tests, then maybe we're going to give
Which
you
is for me, okay, what I'm
an
worried about is that
artifact.
when I'm on the command line and I know I want to do, I want to publish an update, what's the best tool from a command line perspective that I would have within, just like I use Yarn to kind of manage my packages, to basically help me manage the build process, but I could basically just use one tool to do the build process for these different kind of sub projects within the same repo.
In those contexts, is it Yarn? If you're already using Yarn as your command
there
line
is, and I was
runner.
Yeah, there is, and I forget what it's called. There is something with Yarn that you could do that with. And I was also looking at some other. Have you used like Bazel before? Bazel, which is Google's kind of multi-platform build kind of a system that works within basically just installed as a package. And then you can basically has like we talked about before with your Docker, like your build files, like a Docker file that you could then set up.
This is how you build it.
Looks more like a JSON style, but
okay.
Yeah, but so I was looking at like the tools of like what would make my life easier then. So I wanted to worry about if this needs to get built and go here, and that needs to go here. I want to basically do with one tool. So I don't want to.
And honestly,
have
the
multiple.
best I've used shell scripts that are like, I need to release this version because say we were working on a thing, just on a Chrome extension that then needs to be kind of themed for it's the same basic code, but it's two different brands. So shell scripts that are just like, well, bring in the assets and then run npm build, and if I was better with npm, I'm sure I could have done it in npm, but that's not my thing. But this was a JavaScript, it's a front end app, right? So, and I was trying to figure out how to theme these things, so I just built a bunch of shell scripts. But I like the direction you're heading in that. Make the build something you can run from the command line in your local.
Yeah, initially that's what I want to do, just so I can.
Because then the next step is
get it running.
The next step is obvious. You want to automate it when you push a new commit to a branch. Like say you update master, or if maybe you do releases and you label your branches releases, or you go into GitHub and you actually make a release, right? You can hook those other build systems into doing something on that. Oh, there's a new release. And why not be as simple as that build system just setting up the context so it's similar to what you have locally and running that script, whether that's a Yarn script, whether it's an npm, whatever it is.
To automate this and to do it in the cloud and with the hooks, like I said, I love GitHub Actions now, like we do with the site. I think that's really super clean. I've used Google Cloud Build before too, so I like that. So yeah, automating it when it's online and host online, especially for, if I want to trigger that build in some way, I'm not worried about that. I'm just thinking when I'm working a project and I want to, let's say, build a test version, push it to a dev server, do something with it. When I'm doing a commit, I want to kind of keep the same process at the command line, so I don't have to worry about pushing up a line and then having it trigger a process there.
Right, and that's I think a lot of times why that happens is because our build, we design our build for the pipeline that it's in, whether it's GitHub Actions, Circle CI, Travis CI, Jenkins, whatever. It's like, well, that's the only way to get it done. And then you say to the developer, how do you do that locally? Because we're using GitHub Actions to do some special things that you can't necessarily do locally. So then it's just the struggle. It's like, oh, you can't build it locally, or it's difficult, or you build it differently locally. And it's why not just figure out how to build it locally and have very simple automated builds that just call the code that you would call locally. But that all said, can't you run GitHub Actions locally?
Yeah, that's probably that's as you're talking, that's where my mind's going too. I'm thinking maybe I'm just overthinking it because I think now understanding
like if you're
that,
all
that
in
workflow
and you
with
say
the GitHub Action,
GitHub Actions is the way that I'm
like
just opinionate and say that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Whether people like it or not, it works for me. I'm going to do GitHub Actions. I think you can run them locally because I remember doing the same thing with BuildKite when we played with that for a little bit. And I think you could set up all the BuildKite, build stuff. You could run it in a Docker image locally on your on your development system, and basically tell it build. Yeah. And you'd get whatever artifacts you needed that way. So that's kind of where I would lean. But since we're talking about build processes, one of the things that is on my list is actually have a personal website, because right now I think if you go to my website, you will be directed right to my Twitter.
And it's not going to be in Squarespace.
It's not Squarespace, no. And even more needful, and I'm not going to do it, but I I wanted to do this a year ago because I was doing a presentation, two presentations at Confu, which is it's a conference that happens in February in Canada. So you can question why you'd have a conference in February in Canada, but that's a separate discussion. But it's fully remote last year. It's fully remote this year. So I was doing these presentations a year ago, and I'm like, I need to have my personal website up before that so I can just reference it in the talks. And I, of course, didn't. Because one of the things I want to do is you can find talks that I've given at sites that not record like in terms of there's the video, but like track, oh, you spoke at this conference. Like
yes.
Lanyard's a site like that, Joined In is a site that does that, and people rate the talks there. So you can, through that interface, you can kind of find the talks that I've given, but they're not the best because it shows you the talks that I've given at a conference. It doesn't really do this, let's aggregate it and say, well, this is the talk. He's given it at these conferences. It doesn't know that they're the same or they're related. Yeah. So I want my site to at least show these talks that I give frequently, that people want me to give, that people have found very helpful. And so it's easy for people to both say, oh, I saw that talk. It doesn't matter which conference. I don't have to dig through something to find the conference and then find the talk at the conference. I can just be like, oh yeah, I saw Tim's talk on HTTP patterns. So I'm gonna go to that listing on my site. So that's why I want to get it up and online so I can reference it.
Yeah.
But, the slowdown for me is I may have the content in Markdown, but for me, it's that build process of getting the static site built. Those aren't tools that I use a lot of. Now, you'll use Gatsby, but that'll be a little hard for me to use because the fact that I don't do a lot of JavaScript.
Well, let me ask this first. Are you going to you think this as a multi-page site or a single page? Like, how much content do you think you're going to want to have?
First start, I just want it to be or single page like this. This is a splash screen that just basically says, "Hey, Tim's a developer. He's been doing this for a while. He gives talks. You ever want him? You want to talk to him more about the stuff he does? Hit this, click this link. It's a mail to link, and it goes to a different site where you can book time on my calendar or whatever. So simple placeholder." Kind of info site, but then then behind it, I do want to be like, here's his talks and permalinks to each of the talks. So they're probably static pages that are single, so they work no matter what. And you can just be like, oh, this is a specific talk. It shows where he's given it. It has the slides, all the things that people want to get after a talk. Makes it really easy. And so that's where I'm going. But for me, the blocker is there's tooling out there that I know in languages I'm comfortable with that'll build it, and then it's just a build process where I say, hey, I commit a new file to GitHub, build it, put it on my GitHub site, take my domain, point it to the GitHub site, everything's good. My big struggle is the thing that I don't do much of at all, and that's the design. And if you've seen my presentations before, I'm okay at conveying information visually. That I think, I don't want to overstate it, but I think people generally like my presentations, and the design aesthetics may not be like, wow, that was designed by somebody who really understands color theory, and but they don't look terrible, and people enjoy them, and they understand what I'm saying, and it doesn't do a disservice to the content that I'm trying to communicate. But reducing that, like, you want me to write HTML? Oh, please.
Well, have you taken a look at doing like an HTML CSS template? And just have you see what the options are out there for that?
Just steal someone's template?
Well, no, they do have. You could pay it's interesting. I saw this a site I used to use back when I was using Bootstrap before was Bootstrap.
Yeah, the Bootstrap themes.
The Bootstrap. Before Twitter gave Bootstrap their own kind of theme store. It would say they had the site. It's still up. Wrap Bootstrap.
I've not used that in so long.
Which, like I said, I wouldn't recommend using Bootstrap right now. But at the same time, because actually I haven't used it in a while myself. But they have just like these sites that are basically built around, let's say, a CSS framework that you could kind of feel comfortable with. That you could just download. They'll give you 1 or 2, 3 HTML pages. Then you'll have the CSS for it, and then basically just replace the content and replace the images.
The thing that doesn't appeal to me to that is the fact that if you've seen my presentations, they are designed. That I have elements in there that I like, and I don't want to just borrow someone's template and throw my content in there.
So you do want to design yourself?
Yeah, that I do. The thing I don't want to do is the HTML and CSS. Yeah. No, I don't. I did that in the past. I don't ever want to do it again, where I'm trying to align this and that, which is why which is why Webflow, Grape.js, they're very appealing to me.
Yes.
And
I
I've
think
started to play with them and try to understand. And last night I was just looking for where's the Grape.js thing that's just like, here's a blank slate, build it and kind of save it. And I think that's their demo, but it doesn't feel like it's what I'm looking for, even though I think it is what I'm looking for.
No, it pretty much should be,
like
because they have like a Grape.js that has with the HTML button. It'll
right, and then
basically
that's
press
just all
that.
the
You
HTML,
could,
right?
basically, you can get the HTML and CSS, and then you could just
and
download
my goal
that,
is
and then you're
I don't
good.
want to build the site like Webflow wants me to build the site and put content in it, right? They want you to edit it as if it's your site, and I think I've seen that used well to say, we're doing landing pages, one-off things, so marketing can do it and doesn't have to worry about touching, a developer doesn't have to worry about touching it. Just hit save, it's there, it's good. I think it works out well for boy, don't we wish we could do things like WordPress, but we totally don't want to install WordPress on our application because it's, it's our site, right? Like we're a SaaS product, say, and we don't also want WordPress hanging around there. We want something that integrates. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just like we don't need that because we don't need a blog. What we really need is someone to be able to come in and say, for this page, I want the same template, but I want to be able to craft everything inside here however I want it. And I think Webflow works great for that because you can throw the content in. That's not my use case. My use case is I want to take Grape.js and I want to build out what it would look like with content, and then be like, I'm going to take this out, and that is going to be statically that's going to be generated from my content because I have Markdown files, and I'm going to say, take the Markdown files out, render as HTML, and inject in this part of the template. So I want to turn it into templates.
So because I know that you would prefer to do this in PHP rather than JavaScript to actually build, take the Markdown and put it into HTML and put it into HTML template and then build it out.
That part I can do. I know how to do that.
And
it's getting the HTML template that I cannot get to. That's my blocker.
Well, I think Grape.js, right?
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying.
I think that's probably because you just want purely a way to design the HTML and CSS in a visual way.
Exactly, and that's I've started playing with it, and I feel like I said, what I was looking for like this site that says we use Grape.js to let you drag and drop things in and create your own templates. And there's no site that says that, but I feel like it's just a Grape.js demo. It looks like it works. Like you said, you hit HTML and you can there's my HTML. I'll grab out my, lorem ipsum, and I will throw in my, I'll say that's where the content goes. The other thing that I was wondering about is it feels to me, I haven't played with enough, but it feels to me like when I go to Grape.js and I say, give me the HTML, they give me the HTML. And it probably has CSS included in it's one big file. And then there's another button that says I can import HTML.
Well, if you export the template here, it should be two separate.
Is it HTML and CSS?
But no, it should be, well, I guess they have like an export to zip, so you can just download the files. It should be a separate CSS file. I don't think they would embed that into it.
Okay. And then I guess I can upload that same thing I exported to get back to the state that I was in?
Correct. Basically, I'm not sure if they have like an import feature, but I know you could basically just copy and paste the HTML and the CSS into their HTML CSS boxes, like where you can see the code, and then it would just look at that and render that. As long as the only thing you probably have to keep consistent is their classes that they're using, and they're referencing with some of the automated CSS rules they're generating, so it fits with the visual system that they're using. So you probably just have to make sure you keep that consistent.
But I wouldn't be. I don't want to touch that anyway. So.
Yeah, you don't really care about that. Yeah.
And then the next thing, and this is where I'm like, this is the thing that I think I want that isn't quite there yet, or I don't know how to find. And it's almost that idea of, I think it's what you're saying. If I have defined a set of styles, and then I want to go in and create a page that is different than this page, but leverages all those same styles, pretty much be like, oh, I created the template for my talks. Now I need to create the template for this other thing that highlights my projects. I want to be slightly different, but work from the same set of design constraints, because I've said this is what a box looks like. This is, because again, I want it to look similar to the content that I create for talks, and I have little brackets around boxes that call out important information, things like that. So if I get styles that replicate that, and I can do that visually, then I can go in and say, oh yeah, I want that same set of components, but I want a blank slate.
Basically, you want that stored in the cloud somehow, right?
I guess.
That's what
and then
you're
there's also this, like, can I create almost template fragments? You know, where, hey, this is my standard footer. Let's just drag it into the page. This is my standard header. I want that in this template. And
you can actually, well, it would take some more coding because Grape.js does it, because I've looked at it to use as part of sitebuild.io.
What was that? Sitebuild.io?
And I'm sorry, it's not available for you to use right now because I know this would be the solution to your problem.
Is that
but I have looked at technically how you can do, because you can make your own components within Grape.js within the interface to basically render HTML. So if you want to have like a button within the system, then you say, okay, I wanted that button to basically build me a classable list. You know, if it doesn't have the feature already, you can basically do that. But you have to write the code that's going to generate the HTML and CSS automatically onto the page. So it would take a little bit more work, but you could make custom components within that system. Because it is built to be a modular system where even with the interface, like you could use like the stock default layout that the interface gives you. But then if you want to customize it and you want to kind of configure saying, I only want, when I'm styling the text, I only want, these options to be present, or I want to add more options to it. Yes,
gotcha.
you can configure the interface because it's meant to be modular, but it's written in JavaScript too. So you need to just be comfortable with that.
But out of the box, there's no way to say like this content area, this block, I think they call them blocks, right? Mm-hmm. Like this block, which might have my contact information and stuff, and I would call it a footer. Mm-hmm. Is there a way to like extract that and say that is a footer? I want to be able to drag it into a different page that I'm making. You
have to code that into the actual, setup. Okay. So if you're hosting Grape.js yourself, you had it on a page, you would have to do the JavaScript that basically give you that functionality.
That would give you here's a template. Yeah, and just inject it, because that's as I understand more about Grape.js, I guess that is how it's working, right? It's just looking at the DOM and saying, now I'm going to represent that in a visual editor. Okay.
So
it feels like it's close, and I should be able to use it now to do what I want, and then improve upon it if I need to.
I think it's good. Yeah, that was my idea too. Is like it's a system. It's great. It's fabulous how this is built because it's open source. It's meant to basically give you a website builder that you can then plug into another system. So if you're making your own kind of content management system, and then you want to have a visual editor for it, well, Grape.js, that's basically what Webflow is. Well, Webflow took Grape.js.
Are you sure they're built on Grape.js?
I'm pretty sure. They don't say it, but I'm pretty.
When their lawyers come after us,
if you compare the interface. It's pretty close. Similar. So, but it's open source, so they could do that, right? So and any other company could do that. They're building their own management system, and they want to give their employees
depends on the license.
Visual way to edit. You could do that.
Kind of depends on the license.
Well, that's true. I didn't check
as to how much, because depending on the license, they could totally do that, but they may have to make their own version open source. Depending on how.
Unless they're using it like the way the Webflow is, it's on a system. And it's using it, and it's not really selling the interface, because really Webflow is basically more of it selling its hosted
pretty
platform.
Sure some of the licenses would say if you took this code and you used it to create your thing that you're selling, that's totally cool, and you can totally sell it. But you have to also make whatever changes you have open source. And that's the whole open source licenses. Is it MIT? Is it, what is it? Now I forget all the other licenses. Is generally I use and license things under MIT because it's pretty much do with it what you want.
You should take a look at the license.
GPL,
it's neither of those.
What is it?
It's very minimal. It's pretty much you could just use it.
If it's very minimal, it's probably MIT.
But don't sue us. It doesn't say MIT. It just says if you take a look at license on GitHub, it's super, super minimal. And it basically just says, you could basically redistribute this, do anything you want with it. Just don't come back and sue us.
But like I said, that sounds very similar to MIT, which is use it. If it breaks, it's not our problem.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's what I've been playing with. Is that what are you thinking of using Grape.js in the interface for the art department site?
No. My whole idea about this is basically I don't want them to bug me about anything, because I know if I gave them an editor like Grape.js and they made modifications, I would definitely be getting like emails like, how do I do this? What do I do?
No.
No.
Oh,
my basic
want it even simpler.
I want as few options to have for them to be able to add an image, maybe some text to that image, and to update that, delete that. That's about it. I don't want to give them any control.
So for you, it is like an Instagram. It's very much image focused.
Yes, it's basically like a sort of it's public, but it'll be sort of like an internal Instagram sense, Instagram, Twitter style. Yeah.
Gotcha. All right. Well, we'll see next week if you've made any. Are you going to make progress on it this week? What do you
I
think?
have to. Then my goal is to get this done by the end of the semester. So, because I want to be, like I said, if my future plans are be rolling it on, I need to.
You're pretty much gone. So yeah. How many coworkers you have listen to this? How freaked out are they going to be finding out that you have left from this show?
Well, it's fine. We met this morning to talk about our fall schedules, which I still may be teaching next fall. So I don't know. Who knows?
You may be teaching. They think
nobody
you
hires me. I probably will be.
You're saying they may be teaching. All right.
Yeah.
One thing is pretty certain though. There's a good chance if you join us here again next week at 1 o'clock on a Friday, you'll hear me and Mark talk about whatever we want to. Until then.